power, nobility, betrayal. Few figures in galactic history embody these concepts more completely than the man who would become Darth Tyranus. Before he was the elegant Sith Lord leading armies of droids against the Republic, before he stood as the face of the Separatist movement that tore the galaxy apart, he was simply Dooku, a child born into privilege who would walk a path from light to darkness, from Jedi Master to Sith Apprentice. His story begins not with red lightsabers and battle droids, but with a father's fear and a family's shame. The noble birth. The year was 102 years before the Battle of Yavin. The High Republic era, a time when the Jedi Order stood at the height of its power and influence, when peace seemed eternal and darkness felt like ancient history. On the outer rim world of Serenno, a planet synonymous with wealth, aristocracy, and ancient bloodlines, a child entered the world who would one day help bring that golden age crashing down. Serenno was not just any world. Its very name carried weight in galactic politics. For generations, the planet had been ruled by House Serenno, a noble family whose ancestors had once driven back the ancient Sith Empire from their homeworld in ages past. They were liberators, heroes, the very embodiment of civilized resistance against dark side corruption. The irony of what was to come would have been delicious to any Sith Lord who knew the full story. Count Gora ruled Serenno with his wife, Countess Anya. They already had children, a son named Ramil, who would inherit the title, and a daughter, Jenza. Into this world of privilege and power came another son. They named him Dooku. From his first moments, the infant displayed something extraordinary. Objects moved when he cried. Servants reported feeling strange sensations when near the child's crib. Small items would float or shift position when no one was touching them. In most families, such phenomena might have been dismissed as tricks of the eye, coincidence, imagination. But Count Gora knew better. He had heard the stories. He understood what these signs meant. His son was Force sensitive. For some parents, this revelation would have been a source of pride. The Force was respected throughout the galaxy, and the Jedi who wielded it were seen as guardians of peace and justice. To have a Force-sensitive child was considered by many to be a blessing, a sign that the child was destined for greatness. Count Gora did not see it that way. The Count feared the Force. More than that, he despised it. His family's history of fighting against the Sith had instilled in him a deep-seated terror of anything connected to that mysterious energy field. To Gora, those who could touch the Force were not blessed, they were cursed. They were freaks, aberrations, dangers to normal people. The fact that his own blood carried this taint filled him with a horror he could barely contain. He did what he thought he must. He contacted the Jedi Order on Coruscant, requesting that they come to collect the child. But Count Gora could not bear to wait for their arrival. He could not stand to have this Force-sensitive infant under his roof for one moment longer than necessary. The very presence of the child made his skin crawl, filled him with an irrational but overwhelming dread. So, in the dead of night, Count Gora took his infant son from the palace. He carried the baby to the edge of the vast forests that surrounded the family estate. And there, on the border between civilization and wilderness, he laid the child down on the cold ground. No blankets, no identifying markers, no note, no message. Nothing that would connect this abandoned infant to House Serenno. Count Gora walked back to his palace and tried to forget he ever had a third child. The infant Dooku lay alone in the darkness. The forests of Serenno were not kind places. Spine wolves prowled those woods, creatures with massive jaws and an appetite for flesh. The temperature dropped as night deepened. For a normal child, death would have been virtually certain. Exposure, predation, or simple neglect would have claimed the life of the abandoned baby within hours. But the Force moves in mysterious ways. A Jedi Seeker, one of those members of the Order tasked with finding Force-sensitive children throughout the galaxy, was already en route to Serenno. They had received Count Gora's message and were coming to collect the infant. When they arrived at the palace and were told the child was ready for them, they expected to meet a prepared family, perhaps tearful but proud to give their son to the Order. Instead, they felt a disturbance, a pull through the Force. Something was wrong. Following their instincts, the Seekers searched the grounds and eventually ventured into the forest edge. There, they found the infant, cold but alive, miraculously untouched by the predators that should have made quick work of such easy prey. The Force had protected its own. The Seeker wrapped the child in warm cloth and returned to their ship. Within days, the infant who had been abandoned to die was safely within the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, thousands of light years from the family that had rejected him. Count Gora's wish had been granted. He would never have to see his Force-sensitive son again. But the Force had other plans for the child, called Dooku. The Jedi Temple. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant was a mountain of light and ancient wisdom. Its spires reached toward the sky, a symbol of the Order's commitment to reaching for higher understanding. Within its halls, thousands of Jedi trained, meditated, and learned the ways of the Force. For Force-sensitive children brought to the temple, it became their whole world. The only family they would ever know, Dooku grew from infant to young child within these walls. He had no memory of Serenno, no recollection of the parents who had abandoned him. As far as he knew, he had always been a Jedi, always been part of this ancient order. The other younglings were his siblings. The masters were his teachers and guides. The Force was his heritage. He was eventually sorted into the Hawkbat clan, one of many groups of younglings who trained together. Among his fellow students were several who would play important roles in his life. Zang Arrera, a bright and eager learner, Darth Tyranus, who showed early promise with a lightsaber, and most importantly, a boy named Sifo Dyas, who would become Dooku's closest friend. Even as a young child, Dooku stood out, not just because of his abilities with the Force, which were considerable, but because of his manner. Where other younglings were casual and playful, Dooku carried himself with a strange dignity. He spoke carefully, moved with precision, and seemed to hold himself to standards higher than those required by their teachers. The other younglings noticed. Some found it admirable. Others found it off-putting. A few, like Darth Tyranus, found it annoying. Tyranus began calling Dooku His Excellency as a mocking nickname, poking fun at the boy's aristocratic bearing. The irony, of course, was that Tyranus had no idea how accurate his teasing really was. Dooku excelled in his studies. Form after form of lightsaber combat, he absorbed with an intensity that impressed even the most demanding instructors. He pushed himself constantly, always striving to be better, faster, more precise. Master Terra Sinubi, who oversaw the Hawkbat clan, recognized in young Dooku a rare combination of natural talent and fierce determination. But it was with Sifo Dyas that Dooku formed his strongest bond. The two boys complemented each other. Where Dooku was intense and focused, Sifo Dyas brought a different perspective, more attuned to the mystical aspects of the Force. They would spend hours discussing philosophy, practicing together, and dreaming of the missions they would one day undertake as Jedi Knights. The years passed. Dooku grew taller, stronger, more skilled. He had no idea that he was nobility by birth, that somewhere in the galaxy was a family who shared his blood. He knew only the Jedi way, the path of the Force, the life of a temple youngling. That ignorance would not last forever. The Festival of Serenno. When Dooku was around 8 or 9 years old, the Jedi Council made arrangements for a group of younglings to attend the galactic festival being held on Serenno. It was meant to be an educational experience, a chance for the children to see other cultures and worlds beyond Coruscant. Grandmaster Yoda himself would accompany the group, along with Masters Sinube and Eula Braylon. Dooku had no idea that Serenno was his birth world. Why would he? He had been taken from there as an infant, with no identifying information. As far as the Jedi knew, he was simply another Force-sensitive child, his origins unknown. It was not uncommon. Many younglings came to the temple without complete records. The group arrived on Serenno to find a world of wealth and beauty. Ancient architecture, carefully maintained forests, and an aristocracy that moved through society with practiced grace. For the younglings from the temple, it was fascinating to observe. During their time at the festival, Dooku found himself drawn to a particular structure, an ancient building with intricate carvings. One carving in particular caught his attention. A beast called the Tirataka, a creature from Serenno's mythology. Something about it called to him. Without thinking, young Dooku reached out and touched the carved stone. The Force surged through him. The building, weakened by age, suddenly collapsed. Chaos erupted. Dust and debris filled the air. The young Jedi scrambled to safety, but several were trapped beneath the rubble. Yoda immediately sprang into action, using the Force to lift the massive stones and free those who were trapped. Other masters rushed to help. It took several minutes of intense effort, but eventually everyone was pulled to safety. As the dust settled and the Jedi Masters worked to calm the frightened younglings, a man pushed through the growing crowd. He was clearly someone of importance, based on his fine clothes and the way others deferred to him. His face was twisted with anger as he took in the destruction. "What is the meaning of this?" the man demanded, his voice sharp with rage. His eyes found Yoda. "You bring your kind here, and look what happens." Yoda attempted to respond calmly, but the man was not interested in listening. "Which one of you did this?" he demanded, scanning the group of younglings. His gaze locked onto Dooku. Perhaps he saw something familiar in the boy's face. Perhaps the Force was making its will known. "You. "What is your name?" "Dooku, sir," the boy replied, standing straight despite his fear. The man's face went pale. He took a step back as if physically struck. "Dooku," he repeated, his voice now containing something beyond anger, horror, disgust. "That is, no. "Count Gora," Yoda said carefully. The Grand Master's large eyes studied the man with new understanding. "Know this boy, do you?" "I said I never wanted to see him again," Count Gora shouted, his composure completely shattered. "I made myself clear. He is not my son. He is a freak, a thing that should have stayed lost in those woods." The words hit young Dooku like physical blows. Son? What was this man talking about? The other younglings stared, confusion and shock on their faces. Separatist moved closer to his friend, a protective gesture. "You are his father?" Yoda asked, though the question was merely confirmation of what the Force had already told him. "I was," Gora spat. "But I gave up that claim the day I left him outside the palace walls. He is yours now, Jedi. Keep him. I want nothing to do with any of you." As Count Gora turned to storm away, a young woman pushed through the crowd. She looked between Gora and Dooku, her face full of confused emotion. "Father, wait! Is this—" "Come, Jenza," Gora commanded. "We're leaving." The woman, Jenza, looked at Dooku with something like wonder and sadness before following her father. Young Dooku stood frozen, his world rewriting itself in the span of seconds. That man was his father, the one who had abandoned him. And that woman, Jenza, she was his sister. He had a family, they were right here, and they wanted nothing to do with him. Later, after they had returned to their lodgings, Dooku found Master Yoda alone. "Is it true?" Dooku asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "That man is my father? He left me to die?" Yoda's expression was grave. "Sad this truth is," the ancient master said gently. "Yes?" "Contacted us, Count Gora did. When discovered your Force sensitivity, he had, but patience he lacked. Without identification, he left you in the forest. Found you, our seeker did, before harm could come." "He left me where spine wolves hunt," Dooku said quietly. "You told me about spine wolves once, how dangerous they are." "Protected you, the Force did," Yoda said. "Brought you to us, it did. Your family, the Jedi, are. Your home, the temple, is." Dooku nodded slowly, but something had changed in him. The revelation of his origins, the rejection by his birth father, the knowledge that he came from nobility but had been cast out like garbage, all of it settled into his young mind like sediment in water. It would take years for the full implications to surface, but the seeds were planted. He had been abandoned because of what he was, because he could touch the Force, because his own father had feared and hated that gift. The Jedi told him that he was special, that his abilities were a blessing. But his birth family had seen those same abilities as a curse. Who was right? The Padawan of Yoda. The years following the revelation at Serenno were difficult for young Dooku. He threw himself into his training with renewed intensity, as if trying to prove something, to whom perhaps even he did not fully understand. His instructors noted his exceptional progress. His fellow younglings found him even more distant than before, but Dooku did maintain his friendship with Sifo Dyas. In those private moments, talking with his closest friend, Dooku could sometimes let his guard down. Sifo Dyas was developing his own unique connection to the Force, experiencing visions of possible futures. The two boys would discuss these visions, along with prophecy, philosophy, and the nature of the Force itself. Master Lini Kostana also took an interest in young Dooku and Sifo Dyas. Kostana was something of a maverick within the Order, deeply interested in the dark side, not to use it, but to understand it. She believed that the Jedi should study their enemies rather than simply ignore anything connected to darkness. This philosophy resonated with Dooku, who was beginning to question whether the Jedi way of avoiding difficult truths was always wise. When the time came for Dooku to be chosen as a Padawan, there was some speculation about which master would take him. His skills were too obvious to ignore. He was already showing mastery of lightsaber technique beyond his years. His connection to the Force was strong. By any measure, he was one of the most promising younglings his age. The Grand Master himself, Yoda, decided to take Dooku as his apprentice. It was a tremendous honor. Yoda had lived for centuries and trained countless Jedi, many of whom had become legendary in their own right. To be chosen by Yoda marked a student as someone truly special. But the relationship between Master and Padawan did not start smoothly. Yoda had a teaching style that frustrated young Dooku. Rather than offering constant instruction and praise, Yoda would often remain silent, observing, letting his Padawan work through problems on his own. There were times when Dooku felt actively ignored by his master, as if Yoda was testing him through neglect. This came to a head one day when Dooku's frustration finally boiled over. He had been working on a particularly difficult Force technique for weeks, with no acknowledgement from Yoda. His progress with his lightsaber forms had been extraordinary, but still Yoda said nothing. The young Padawan felt like he was invisible. In the temple gardens stood an ancient tree known simply as the Great Tree. It was a massive, Force-sensitive organism that Yoda particularly loved. Dooku decided that if he could lift the Great Tree, surely that would earn his master's attention. He positioned himself before the enormous tree, centered himself in the Force, and reached out with all his power. Around him, smaller objects began to rise, stones, benches, even some of the smaller plants. Dooku strained, pouring everything he had into the attempt to lift the great tree. The tree's roots groaned, the earth around it cracked. For a moment, it seemed like it might actually work. Then Yoda's voice cut through Dooku's concentration. "Stop!" The objects around Dooku crashed back down. He turned to see his master standing there. And for the first time in weeks, Yoda was looking directly at him with full attention. "Patience you lack," Yoda said. "Seeking attention you are. Approval. But for you, the Force exists not. For the Force, you exist." "I was just trying to show you that I'm ready for more advanced training," Dooku protested. "I've mastered everything you've given me, but you never acknowledge it. How am I supposed to know if I'm progressing?" "Know within yourself you should," Yoda replied. "Seek not validation from others." The Force will guide you, if listen you do." "But I need direction," Dooku insisted. "I need to know what comes next, what I should be working toward." Yoda regarded his Padawan for a long moment. "Much promise you have, much potential. But careful you must be. Pride I sense in you, ambition, not bad these things are, in moderation, but consume you. They can, if balanced, they are not." It was the most direct feedback Yoda had given him in months, and Dooku seized on it. "I'm not proud or ambitious," he said. "I just want to be the best Jedi I can be. To master my abilities so I can help people." "And yet," Yoda said gently, "trying to lift my tree you were, not to help anyone, but to impress." Dooku had no response to that. His master was right, of course. He had been showing off. "Learn you must," Yoda continued, "that the destination matters less than the journey. That progress for its own sake hollow is. That true strength comes not from power, but from wisdom. These lessons teach myself I cannot. Discover them you must." Over the following years, Dooku and Yoda developed a stronger bond, though it would never be a warm relationship by conventional standards. Yoda pushed his Padawan hard, taking him on missions to worlds in crisis, exposing him to the harsh realities of the galaxy beyond the temple's walls. They traveled to war-torn planets, where Dooku saw firsthand how political failures led to suffering. They mediated disputes between systems where corporate greed had created humanitarian disasters. They investigated criminal syndicates that preyed on the weak while the Republic turned a blind eye. Each mission taught Dooku something about the galaxy and about himself. He saw that the Jedi did immense good, that their intervention saved lives and brought peace. But he also began to see the limitations of the Order. They could only help when called upon. They could not force the Senate to pass better laws or make corrupt officials act justly. They were bound by Republic law even when those laws were unjust. These observations troubled him. In quiet moments, Dooku would discuss them with Sifo Dyas, who had been taken as the Padawan of Master Kostana. The two friends would share their experiences, comparing notes on what they had learned about the galaxy. Dooku also grew increasingly interested in certain forbidden topics. Master Yoda had a holocron of ancient Jedi prophecies, texts that spoke of chosen ones and balance and the fate of the Force itself. The Order had largely abandoned the study of prophecy, believing it led to dangerous obsessions with the future rather than focus on the present. But Dooku couldn't help his fascination. When he asked Yoda about the prophecy holocron, his master's expression had been strange, almost pained. The prophets of old, powerful they were, Yoda had said, but dangerous, their path proved. To know the future, many were drawn, and to darkness, that desire often led. Study prophecy we do not, for good reason. But you still have the holocron, Dooku pointed out. If prophecy is so dangerous, why keep it? Remember, we must, Yoda replied, what came before. Forget our mistakes we cannot, or repeat them we will. It was a non-answer, and Dooku recognized it as such. But he did not press the issue, not then. As his training progressed, Dooku began to master Form II lightsaber combat, also known as Makashi. It was an elegant form, focused on precision and economy of movement, particularly effective in lightsaber-to-lightsaber dueling. In an age when such duels were rare, most Jedi focused on forms better suited to deflecting blaster fire. But something about Makashi appealed to Dooku's sense of refinement. Yoda noted his Padawan's interest and did not discourage it. "Each Jedi their own path must find," he said. "Trust in your instincts, I do." By the time Dooku completed his Padawan training and achieved the rank of Jedi Knight, around 70 BA, he had become one of the most skilled duelists the Order had seen in generations. His mastery of Makashi was nearly unmatched. His understanding of the Force was deep and nuanced. He stood as a testament to Yoda's training methods, even if their relationship had never quite been warm. On the day Dooku was knighted, Yoda spoke words to him that would echo through the years. "A great Jedi you will be, this I know. But remember, Dooku, that power without wisdom is dangerous, and wisdom without compassion is empty. Both you must cultivate. Balance you must maintain." Dooku bowed to his former master with genuine respect. "I will honor the training you've given me," he said. "I will serve the Force and the Order with everything I have." Yoda's expression was unreadable. "Hope I do," he said quietly. "That true those words remain." The Master takes an apprentice. Jedi Knight. Dooku quickly established himself as a formidable member of the Order. His missions were successful. His combat skills were exceptional. His knowledge of the Force impressed even the Masters on the Council. Within a relatively short time, he attained the rank of Jedi Master, a recognition of both his abilities and his readiness to train others in the ways of the Force. His first Padawan was a young man named Rael Averross. Rael was a talented but somewhat unconventional student, one whose rough edges and colloquial manner contrasted sharply with Dooku's refined bearing. Where Dooku was precise and controlled, Rael was passionate and spontaneous. Where Dooku moved through the galaxy with aristocratic grace, Rael remained proudly connected to his home planet's culture, even retaining his accent. The pairing worked better than some expected. Dooku's structured approach helped channel Rael's raw abilities, while Rael's enthusiasm reminded Dooku that the Jedi path could include joy and personality. They went on numerous missions together, and Dooku successfully guided Rael to knighthood. But it was Dooku's second Padawan who would define his legacy as a master. Qui-Gon Jinn was a young boy with tremendous potential. He had shown exceptional skill in lightsaber combat during a youngling tournament, winning the competition and catching Dooku's attention. When the time came to choose his next apprentice, Dooku saw in Qui-Gon something special, a strength of character combined with natural ability that reminded him of his own youth. Qui-Gon was honored to be chosen by Master Dooku. The man's reputation was already legendary within the Order. To be his Padawan marked one as being groomed for greatness. The early days of their partnership were intense. Dooku had high standards and was not afraid to push his student hard. Where some masters might offer constant encouragement, Dooku believed in teaching through challenge. He would set difficult tasks and expect Qui-Gon to rise to meet them without excessive hand-holding. It was a teaching philosophy that sometimes made Qui-Gon feel inadequate. In those early days, the young Padawan often sought advice from Rael Averross, Dooku's former student. Rael would reassure him that Dooku's distant manner was not rejection, it was simply how the master taught. "He pushes because he believes in you," Rael explained. "If he didn't think you could handle it, he wouldn't bother." One of their early missions together would prove formative for both Master and Padawan. They were sent to Shurappak, a world engulfed in conflict. It was Qui-Gon's first real battle, and the young Padawan was understandably nervous. As their shuttle descended under heavy fire, Qui-Gon looked to his master for reassurance. Dooku sat calmly, seemingly unaffected by the danger. His composure in the face of chaos was exactly what Qui-Gon needed to see. If Master Dooku was unafraid, then there was no reason for him to be paralyzed by fear. The young Padawan took a deep breath and centered himself in the Force, following his master's example. On the ground, they reunited with Rael Averross, who was already on Shurappak, coordinating Republic forces. Rael greeted his former master warmly and took a moment to speak with Qui-Gon, offering encouragement and advice. It was the beginning of a pattern that would continue throughout Qui-Gon's training, Rael serving as an unofficial mentor and source of perspective when Dooku's methods became too austere. As Qui-Gon's training progressed, Dooku began to share some of his deeper interests with his Padawan. He introduced Qui-Gon to the holocron of prophecies that Yoda had once warned him about, explaining that while prophecy was dangerous, understanding the past and its predictions could offer valuable context for the present. Qui-Gon was fascinated. The very idea that the ancient mystics had tried to see the shape of future events, that they had recorded their visions, opened up new dimensions of Force understanding. Under Dooku's guidance, Qui-Gon began to study these texts, developing his own interest in prophecy that would one day lead him to believe in the Chosen One. "The Council discourages prophecy study," Dooku explained to his Padawan one day, "because they fear it will make Jedi obsessed with destiny rather than focused on the present moment. They're not wrong to be cautious. Many mystics went down dark paths because they became too focused on what might be rather than what is." "But you study it," Qui-Gon pointed out. "I do," Dooku agreed, "because I believe that understanding the patterns of the Force, even speculative patterns, gives us better context for our decisions. Prophecy should inform, not dictate. That's the line the ancient Jedi failed to walk." It was exactly the kind of nuanced thinking that Dooku specialized in, finding the middle ground between the Order's blanket prohibition and dangerous obsession. Qui-Gon absorbed these lessons, learning to think critically about Jedi doctrine, rather than accepting it blindly. They went on numerous missions to go together. They mediated disputes, fought pirates, investigated mysteries, and brought justice to lawless regions. On one particularly memorable mission, they found themselves defending a village against a corrupt senator. The senator's son had been kidnapped by the desperate villagers as a way to force the politician to address their grievances. It was the kind of morally complex situation that no amount of Jedi training could fully prepare one for. The villagers were technically criminals, but their actions had been born of desperation. The senator had ignored his duties, but did that justify taking his child hostage? Qui-Gon wanted to free the boy immediately. Dooku counseled patience, taking time to understand the full situation. Eventually, they negotiated a resolution that protected the child while also forcing the senator to acknowledge his failures. It was a success, but Dooku could see that Qui-Gon was troubled by the experience. "You doubt whether anything will truly change," Dooku observed, as they walked back to their ship, the grateful villagers waving behind them. "The senator said the right words," Qui-Gon replied, "but will he actually follow through? And if he doesn't, what then? We'll be off on another mission, and these people will be back where they started. You're learning one of the hard truths of being a Jedi," Dooku said. "We can intervene in moments of crisis, but we cannot fix the systems that create those crises. The Republic is too large, too complicated, too bound by competing interests. We do what we can, where we can, when we can. It has to be enough." "But what if it isn't?" Qui-Gon asked. "What if the galaxy needs more than moments of intervention? What if it needs fundamental change?" Dooku was quiet for a long moment. "Then we trust that the Force will bring about that change in its own time," he finally said. But even as he spoke the words, a part of him wondered if they were true, or if they were simply what Jedi told themselves to avoid uncomfortable questions. As Qui-Gon approached the end of his Padawan training, the relationship between master and student had evolved. There was mutual respect, even affection, though both men were too reserved to express it openly. Dooku had taught Qui-Gon everything he knew about lightsaber combat, force techniques, philosophy, and the delicate art of being a Jedi in a complicated galaxy. When Qui-Gon achieved knighthood, Dooku felt a profound sense of pride. This young man, once nervous on a shuttle to his first battle, now stood as a Jedi Knight in his own right. The Force was strong with him. His sense of justice was keen. He would do great things. What Dooku could not know, standing there watching his former Padawan accept his new rank, was how much impact those teachings would ultimately have. Qui-Gon would one day discover the Chosen One. He would train Obi-Wan Kenobi, who would train Anakin Skywalker. The ripples from Dooku's mentorship would reshape galactic history in ways he could never imagine. But in that moment, Dooku simply felt the satisfaction of having passed on his knowledge to a worthy student. He had given Qui-Gon the tools to be a great Jedi. What Qui-Gon did with those tools would be his own choice. "May the Force be with you," Dooku said formally, offering the traditional farewell. "And with you, Master," Qui-Gon replied, bowing deeply. "Always." The seeds of discontent. The years that followed were successful ones for Jedi Master Dooku. He continued to serve the Order with distinction, taking on missions that required his unique combination of diplomatic skill and combat prowess. His reputation within the Order grew. He was respected, admired, and considered by many to be a model Jedi. But beneath the surface, something was changing. Each mission seemed to reveal new layers of corruption within the Republic. Senators who cared more about their personal wealth than their constituents. Corporations that exploited entire planets while the law looked away. Bureaucrats who buried important matters in red tape. while people suffered. The Jedi were often called in to fix problems that never should have existed in the first place, problems created by the very government they served. Dooku began to voice these concerns. In meetings with other Jedi, he would point out the systemic issues that made their interventions necessary. He argued that the Jedi should take a more active role in pushing for political reform rather than simply responding to crises. The Council listened politely, but did not act. They insisted that the Jedi must remain neutral, must not interfere in political matters beyond their mandate. To do otherwise would be to overstep their bounds and risk making the situation worse. Dooku found this reasoning increasingly frustrating. How could the Jedi claim to serve peace and justice while refusing to address the root causes of conflict and injustice? How could they stand by and watch the Republic decay from within? His old friend Dyas shared some of these concerns. By this time, Dyas had become a Jedi Master as well, and his gift for foresight had grown stronger with time. He was experiencing visions of a great conflict approaching, a war that would consume the galaxy. He tried to warn the Council, but they dismissed his visions as possibilities rather than certainties, alternative futures rather than inevitable ones. Dooku and Dyas would meet privately to discuss their frustrations. Both felt that the Order was becoming complacent, too attached to the status quo to see the danger ahead. "Sometimes I wonder if the Jedi have become too comfortable," Dooku said during one of these conversations. "We've had peace for so long that we've forgotten how to recognize threats that don't announce themselves with a lightsaber." "The Council believes in the Force's will," Dyas replied. "They think that if disaster truly approaches, the Force will give us clear warning." "The Force is giving us clear warning," Dooku insisted. "Through your visions, through the growing corruption we see everywhere." But they don't want to hear it, because acting on it would require them to change, to take risks, to potentially compromise their comfortable position. It was the kind of thinking that would have alarmed the Council if they had heard it. A Jedi Master openly criticizing the Order's approach was one thing, but suggesting that the Council was willfully blind out of self-interest came dangerously close to the kind of cynicism that led down darker paths. Around this time, there were discussions about expanding the Jedi High Council. New masters were being considered to fill positions that had become vacant, or to add fresh perspectives to the governing body of the Order. Dooku's name came up. His skills were undeniable, his experience vast, his wisdom evident. But when the final selections were made, Dooku was not among them. He was stunned. He had served the Order faithfully for decades. He had trained successful Padawans. He had completed countless difficult missions. By any objective measure, he deserved a place on the Council. When he asked Master Yoda about the decision, his former teacher was blunt. "Concern the Council has about your views," Yoda said. "Question too much, you do. Critical of the Order. You have become." "Questioning and being critical aren't the same as being disloyal," Dooku protested. "I'm trying to make the Order better, to make it face truths it's ignoring." "Perhaps," Yoda said. "But trust also matters, and trust you have lost from some. Ego I sense in you, pride, a belief that you know better than the collective wisdom of the council. And what if I do? Dooku said, his frustration finally breaking through. What if the council's collective wisdom is just collective blindness? What if everything I'm saying is true, and you simply don't want to admit it? Yoda's expression was sad. Then, right, you may prove to be, but a Jedi who cannot work within the Order structure valuable to the Council is not. No matter how wise, no matter how powerful. Dooku left that meeting feeling betrayed. He had given everything to the Order, and they had rejected him because he dared to point out uncomfortable truths. The irony was bitter. The Jedi preached humility, but they were too proud to admit their own failings. They spoke of wisdom, but they ignored evidence that contradicted their worldview. For the first time in his life, Dooku seriously questioned whether the Jedi Order was worth his loyalty. Then came the news that would push him past the point of no return. Qui-Gon Jinn was dead. The death of Qui-Gon Jinn. The report reached the temple from Naboo. There had been a confrontation with what appeared to be a Sith Lord. In the aftermath of a battle to liberate the planet from Trade Federation occupation, Qui-Gon Jinn had faced a warrior wielding a red lightsaber and drawing on dark side power. Qui-Gon had died in that duel. For Dooku, the news was devastating. Qui-Gon had been more than just his former Padawan. He had been, in many ways, Dooku's finest achievement as a master. The young man's integrity, his independent spirit, his dedication to justice, all of that had been shaped in part by Dooku's teaching. And now he was gone. Cut down by a Sith who should not have existed, because the Sith was supposed to be extinct. The Order had believed for a millennium that the ancient enemies of the Jedi had been destroyed. Yet, here was evidence that they had returned, that they had been operating in secret for who knows how long, planning and plotting while the Jedi remained oblivious. Dooku demanded answers from the Council. How had the Sith returned without the Jedi knowing? What were they planning? What action would the Order take? The Council's response was cautious. They would investigate. They would increase their vigilance. But they would not take drastic action based on a single encounter. After all, Qui-Gon's killer had been defeated by Obi-Wan Kenobi. Perhaps this was an isolated incident, a lone dark side user, rather than a true Sith conspiracy. Dooku was horrified by this response. One of their finest knights had been killed by a Sith assassin, and the Council's answer was essentially to wait and see. This was precisely the kind of complacency he had been warning about. If you had listened to Separatist's warnings, Dooku said accusingly in a council session, if you had taken the threats seriously instead of dismissing them, maybe Qui-Gon would still be alive. Impossible. To prevent every death is, Yoda replied quietly. Tragic, the loss of Qui-Gon is, but blame we cannot accept for actions we could not foresee. But they were foreseen, Dooku shouted, his composure finally cracking completely. Separatist saw conflict coming. I saw the corruption and evil spreading. We both warned you, and you dismissed us as paranoid or ambitious or whatever comfortable explanation let you avoid taking real action. The council chamber was silent. No Jedi spoke to the council that way. The lack of respect, the open anger, it was all deeply troubling. Master Dooku, Mace Windu said carefully, we understand that you are grieving. When you have had time to process this loss, we can discuss. I don't need time, Dooku interrupted. I need the Order to wake up. But I see now that isn't going to happen. You'll keep serving a corrupt republic, ignoring the signs of danger until it's too late, and good Jedi will keep dying because of it. He left the council chamber without being dismissed. It was a shocking breach of protocol, one that would have consequences. But Dooku no longer cared. His faith in the Jedi Order had been cracking for years. Qui-Gon's death shattered what remained. Shortly after this confrontation, Dooku received a message from his home world. It was from his sister, Jynza, whom he had maintained contact with over the years despite their complicated history. The message was urgent. Serenno was in crisis, and she was begging for his help. Their brother, Count Ramil, had become a tyrant. He was oppressing the people of Serenno, hiring mercenaries to stage fake attacks so he could crack down on dissent and consolidate his power. The situation was spiraling toward catastrophe, and Jynza saw no way out except to reach out to her Jedi brother. Dooku took the message to the council. Despite their recent argument, he still believed in doing things properly. He requested permission to travel to Serenno and resolve the situation. The council granted his request and even allowed him to take Masters Sephodias and Kostana with him. What happened on Serenno would change Dooku's life forever. Return to Serenno. Returning to his birth world after so many years was strange for Dooku. He remembered the child he'd been at the festival, the moment of discovering his origins. Now he was returning as a Jedi Master, but also as nobility by birth, to confront his own blood. Jynza met them in secret. She explained the full extent of Ramil's corruption and the suffering it was causing. The people were at their breaking point. If something didn't change soon, there would be civil war and thousands would die. Dooku, Sephodias, and Kostana investigated the situation carefully. They confirmed everything Jynza had said. Ramil was indeed staging attacks against his own people to justify his authoritarian measures. He was working with criminal mercenaries, funneling funds meant for public welfare into his private accounts, and systematically dismantling any opposition to his rule. The question was what to do about it. They were Jedi, not assassins. They could not simply remove Ramil by force, but neither could they stand by and watch him destroy Serenno. The situation came to a head when Ramil learned of the Jedi presence. Rather than backing down, he ordered his mercenaries to attack. It was a desperate gamble, an attempt to eliminate the witnesses to his crimes and blame their deaths on the very dissidents he had been persecuting. In the chaos of the attack, Dooku confronted his brother directly. Ramil was not force-sensitive, was not trained in any kind of combat, but he was surrounded by armed mercenaries and protected by every advantage that money and position could provide. "You have no right to be here," Ramil snarled. "You were cast out. You're not really part of this family." "You're right," Dooku replied, igniting his lightsaber. "I'm not part of your family. But I am part of Serenno's future, and that future doesn't include you." What exactly happened in the next few minutes would be debated later. The mercenaries attacked. Dooku defended himself, and when the dust settled, Count Ramil was dead, killed by his brother's lightsaber. Dooku stood over the body, breathing hard. He had just killed his own brother, not in a fair duel, not in clean combat, but in a confused melee where the lines between defense and execution had blurred beyond recognition. Separatist and Costana found him there, standing amid the bodies of mercenaries and the cooling corpse of the Count of Serenno. "We need to leave," Costana said urgently. "This is going to be complicated to explain." But Jenza appeared, along with other Serenno nobles and citizens who had witnessed the confrontation. They looked at Dooku, bloodied lightsaber still in hand, and their expressions were not horror, but hope. "The tyranny is over," one of the nobles said. "The rightful heir has reclaimed his place." Dooku wanted to protest that he wasn't the rightful heir, that he had been cast out, that he was a Jedi, not a Count. But looking at the faces of the people, seeing the relief and hope there, something shifted inside him. He could do more good here, as Count of Serenno, than he ever could as a Jedi following the Council's conservative policies. With the resources of House Serenno at his disposal, he could actually effect real change. He could protect these people, reform the system, address the root causes of suffering rather than just treating the symptoms. All he had to do was stay. "The Jedi Order has been my family since I was a child," Dooku said slowly, speaking to everyone but thinking of Yoda. "The temple has been my home, but I realize now that my future lies here on Serenno. These are my people. This is my responsibility." Separatist looked stricken. "You're leaving the Order?" "I am," Dooku confirmed. "I have to." Master Costana studied him carefully. "This is about more than just Serenno, isn't it? This is about your disagreements with the Council." "It's about everything," Dooku said. "About Qui-Gon dying while the Council debated. About the Republic rotting from within while we maintain a peaceful neutrality. About finally having the power to actually fix things rather than just respond to crises." He looked at his sister Jenza, who had tears in her eyes. He looked at the people of Serenno, who were already calling him Count Dooku. He looked at his fellow Jedi and saw their concern. "I'm sorry," he said, "but this is the right path. For me and for them." He would return to Coruscant to make it official, to hand back his lightsaber and formally resign from the Order. But in his heart, the decision was already made. The Jedi had lost Count Dooku. They just didn't know yet what they had truly lost. The resignation. The Jedi Temple had stood for thousands of years as a beacon of light in the galaxy. Its halls had witnessed countless momentous events, but few as quietly devastating as the day Jedi Master Dooku formally resigned from the Order. Dooku stood before the High Council one final time. His lightsaber, the weapon he had carried for decades, lay on the table before them. He had come prepared to explain his decision, to justify his choice, but found that words seemed inadequate to the moment. "Leave the Order, you wish to," Yoda said. It was not a question. The ancient master's eyes were heavy with sadness. "Certain of this? You are." "I am," Dooku replied. "My brother is dead." Serenno needs leadership. More than that, the people there need protection from the same forces that allowed Ramil to become a tyrant. I can provide that protection as their count. As a Jedi, I would be recalled to Coruscant and the planet would fall back into crisis. "The Jedi have been your family," Mace Windu said, "for your entire life. You're willing to give all of that up?" "The Jedi will always be part of me," Dooku said carefully. "The training, the philosophy, the commitment to justice, none of that changes. But I've come to realize that there are many ways to serve the greater good. The Order's way is not the only way." It was a diplomatic answer, one that didn't reveal the depth of his disillusionment. He could have told them how Qui-Gon's death had broken something in him, how their failure to act on warnings had convinced him they were no longer capable of meeting the galaxy's challenges. But what would be the point? They had heard his criticisms before and dismissed them. Better to leave with grace than to burn bridges. "Wish you well, we do," Yoda said finally. "Proud of you, I have been. Remain proud of you, I hope to." There was weight in those words, a warning, perhaps, or a plea. Dooku bowed deeply, a sign of respect that was genuine despite everything. "May the Force be with you," he said to the Council. "And with you," Mace replied. "Always." Dooku walked out of the Council chamber for the last time. Behind him, his lightsaber remained on the table, a symbol of everything he was leaving behind. He was no longer Jedi Master Dooku. He was simply Dooku, Count of Serenno, or so he believed. News of Dooku's resignation spread through the temple quickly. Many Jedi were shocked. Dooku had been such a prominent figure, such a skilled and respected master. For him to leave seemed unthinkable. Obi-Wan Kenobi, now a Jedi Knight himself after Qui-Gon's death, was particularly troubled. He sought out Dooku before the former master left Coruscant. "I don't understand," Obi-Wan said. "Master Qui-Gon spoke so highly of you. He believed in the Jedi way because of what you taught him. And now you're leaving?" Dooku regarded his former Padawan's apprentice with something like sympathy. "Your master was a good man," he said, "one of the best I've known. But even Qui-Gon questioned the Order's methods at times. He followed the will of the Force rather than the letter of Jedi law. In the end, that's what I'm doing as well." "By becoming a politician?" Obi-Wan said, unable to keep the skepticism from his voice. "By taking responsibility for my people," Dooku corrected, "by using the position I was born into to protect those who need protecting. The Jedi aren't wrong, Obi-Wan, but neither are they the only path to righteousness." It was their last conversation. Obi-Wan would later tell Anakin Skywalker about Count Dooku with a mixture of respect and confusion, describing a Jedi who had lost his way despite having all the tools to be great. History would judge whether Obi-Wan's assessment was fair. Dooku returned to Serenno and was formally installed as Count. The people welcomed him with genuine enthusiasm. Here was a man who had killed a tyrant, who had Jedi training and wisdom, who promised to use the family's considerable wealth and influence for the benefit of all Serenno's citizens. The early months were challenging, but rewarding. Dooku threw himself into governance with the same intensity he had once applied to Jedi training. He reformed tax structures, invested in infrastructure, cracked down on corruption, and established trade agreements that brought prosperity to the planet. He also maintained limited contact with some Jedi. His resignation had been on good terms, after all. He wasn't an enemy of the Order, just someone who had chosen a different path. The Council respected his privacy, but kept a casual watch on him, more out of concern than suspicion. Everything seemed to be proceeding exactly as one would expect for a former Jedi who had returned to civilian life. But darkness was already reaching out to Count Dooku. Darkness in the form of a man who had been watching him for years. Darth Sidious had long been interested in Dooku. The Sith Lord, operating publicly as Senator and later Chancellor Palpatine, recognized in Dooku a powerful Force user who was becoming disillusioned with the Jedi. Such a person was potentially useful, more than useful. Sidious's current apprentice, Darth Maul, had been a blunt instrument, powerful, yes, but ultimately limited. Maul was a weapon, not a partner in grand strategy. When Maul fell on Naboo, cut down by Obi-Wan Kenobi in the same duel that killed Qui-Gon Jinn, Sidious was irritated but not devastated. The loss of one apprentice simply meant it was time to find another. And Dooku, bitter about the Order, grieving his former student, now wielding secular power on Serenno, was absolutely perfect. The seduction begins. The first contact was subtle. Dooku received a message from someone claiming to be a concerned citizen of the Republic, someone who shared his views about corruption and the need for reform. The message was thoughtful, well-reasoned, touching on many of the same frustrations Dooku had voiced during his time with the Jedi. Curious, Dooku responded. A correspondence began. The mysterious figure never revealed his true identity at first. He called himself a fellow traveler, someone who believed the Republic could be saved, but only through decisive action. He spoke of the Senate's incompetence, the Jedi's complacency, the corporation's stranglehold on galactic commerce. Every message resonated with Dooku's own observations. Slowly, carefully, the conversations turned to the Force. The mysterious correspondent demonstrated knowledge of Force philosophy that went beyond what most civilians would know. He spoke of the Jedi Code with respectful criticism, pointing out its limitations, its restrictions, its insistence on emotional suppression. The Jedi fear passion, one message read. They believe that feeling deeply leads to the dark side. But is that really true? Or have they simply confused passion with corruption? One can feel deeply and still serve justice. One can embrace strong emotions and channel them toward righteous ends. The Jedi teach that we must diminish ourselves to remain pure. I believe we must embrace our full potential to do the most good. It was seductive philosophy, especially to someone like Dooku, who had chafed under Jedi restrictions for years. The idea that his frustrations were not weaknesses, but signs of deeper understanding, that his anger at injustice was not something to suppress but to harness, it spoke to everything he had been feeling. The correspondence continued for months. Eventually, the mysterious figure suggested they meet in person. Dooku agreed, curious to finally put a face to the voice that had been so persuasive. They met in a private location on Coruscant, away from prying eyes. When Dooku arrived, he found himself face to face with Supreme Chancellor Palpatine. The revelation was shocking. The leader of the Republic, the most powerful politician in the galaxy, had been the one reaching out to him. Dooku's first instinct was suspicion. Was this some kind of trap? A test? But Palpatine put him at ease with simple honesty. "I have been watching you for some time, Count Dooku," the Chancellor said. "Even before you left the Jedi Order, I recognized in you something rare, someone who could see the truth of what's happening to the Republic. Someone with the wisdom to understand what needs to be done." "And what needs to be done?" Dooku asked carefully. "The Republic is dying," Palpatine said bluntly. "Not from external threats, but from internal rot. The Senate is hopelessly corrupt. The Jedi are too bound by tradition to adapt. The corporations have more power than the people they're supposed to serve. If nothing changes, the entire system will collapse, and millions will suffer in the chaos that follows." "I've been saying the same thing for years," Dooku replied. "The Jedi Council refused to listen." "Because they're part of the problem," Palpatine said. "They've had 1,000 years of peace, and it's made them soft. They don't understand that sometimes the only way to preserve what's good is to be willing to make hard choices, to accept that you can't save everyone, that greater goods sometimes require lesser evils." They talked for hours. Palpatine painted a vision of a reformed republic, one where merit mattered more than connections, where justice was swift and corruption punished, where the needs of the many outweighed the privileges of the few. It was everything Dooku had ever wanted to fight for. "I can't do it alone," Palpatine admitted. "I need allies. People who understand what's at stake and are willing to do what must be done. People like you." "What exactly are you proposing?" Dooku asked. "Nothing overt, not yet. But I'm building a network of individuals who share our vision. Some are in the Senate. Some are in the military. Some, like you, have unique skills and resources. When the time comes to act, we'll be ready. We'll save the Republic, even if we have to destroy it first to do so." It was, Dooku would realize much later, the perfect recruitment pitch. Palpatine had identified everything Dooku cared about and promised a way to achieve it. He had framed collaboration not as betrayal of principles, but as their ultimate fulfillment. And Dooku, grieving and bitter and convinced the Jedi had failed, believed him. Their association deepened over the following years. Palpatine introduced Dooku to others in his network, individuals who commanded corporate armies or controlled vital resources. Dooku began to see the shape of Palpatine's plan. They would create a crisis, a threat, large enough to force the Republic to grant Palpatine emergency powers. Then, wielding those powers, he could sweep away the corruption and reform the system from within. It was audacious. It was dangerous. It was necessary, or so Dooku believed. But there was something Palpatine hadn't revealed yet, something that would change everything. The revelation. Their relationship continued for several years. Dooku had become increasingly involved in Palpatine's network, using his wealth and influence to support various initiatives. He funded political campaigns for reform-minded candidates. He established charities that genuinely helped people while also building networks of loyal supporters. He was, by all accounts, doing good work. But he was also being slowly prepared for something darker. Palpatine began introducing more radical ideas into their conversations. The necessity of secret military forces, the utility of preemptive strikes, the inevitability of casualties in any great transformation. Each concept was presented reasonably, justified by the greater good they were working toward. Dooku noticed the shift, but rationalized it. Of course, reform would require difficult choices. Of course, they couldn't advertise everything they were planning. Of course, some people would resist change violently and need to be dealt with accordingly. He also noticed that Palpatine seemed to know things he shouldn't. Details about Jedi operations, insights into Force philosophy that no civilian should possess. Little things that didn't quite add up. One evening, Dooku confronted him directly. "You're more than you appear, Chancellor. I've known that from the beginning, but I've refrained from pressing the issue. I think it's time you were honest with me about who you really are." Palpatine smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "You're right, of course. I've been waiting for you to work up the courage to ask directly." "Very well. I'll show you the truth, Count Dooku. But I warn you, once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Once you know what I truly am, you'll have to make a choice about who you are." "I can handle the truth," Dooku said confidently. "We'll see," Palpatine replied. The Chancellor stood, and as he did, the force around him changed. The man Dooku had been speaking with, the affable politician with a vision for reform, fell away like a mask. In his place stood something else, something ancient and terrible and powerful. The dark side radiated from Palpatine like heat from a furnace. Dooku, who had spent his entire life around Force users, had never felt anything like it. This wasn't just someone who had touched darkness. This was someone who had dived into its deepest depths and emerged transformed. "I am Darth Sidious," Palpatine said, his voice now carrying harmonics that seemed to vibrate in Dooku's bones. "Dark Lord of the Sith, Master of the Dark Side, and everything I've told you about the Republic, about the Jedi, about what needs to be done. That was all true. I simply neglected to mention that I intend to rule the galaxy once the transformation is complete." Dooku's hand moved instinctively toward where his lightsaber would have been if he still carried one. He was unarmed, caught off guard, face to face with a Sith Lord, the ancient enemies of everything he had once stood for. "You're wondering if you can escape," Sidious continued, reading Dooku's expression. "You're calculating your chances of making it to the door, of warning someone, of stopping me. Let me save you the trouble. You can't. But more importantly, you don't actually want to. The Sith are evil," Dooku said. But even as he spoke the words, they felt rote, like something memorized rather than believed. "The Sith are pragmatic," Sidious corrected. "The Jedi speak of peace but serve a government that oppresses billions. We speak of power but seek to create order. Tell me, Count Dooku, which is more evil, pretty lies or ugly truths?" It was sophistry, and Dooku knew it, but it was also compelling. Everything Sidious had helped him accomplish over the past years had been genuinely good. The people they had helped were really helped. The corruption they had exposed was really corrupt. "Why reveal yourself to me now?" Dooku asked. "Because my previous apprentice is dead," Sidious said bluntly. "Because I need someone with your skills, your connections, your understanding of the Jedi. Because you're already helping me, you just didn't know the full context. And because, Count Dooku, you've been flirting with the dark side for years without admitting it to yourself." "That's not true," Dooku protested. "Isn't it?" Sidious asked. "The anger you felt when the Council rejected you, the rage when Qui-Gon died, the satisfaction when you killed your brother. You've been channeling dark side energy all along. You've just been telling yourself it was righteous anger, justified emotion. The dark side doesn't care about your justifications. It cares about power. And you, Count Dooku, have always craved power. Power to protect, power to reform, power to make the galaxy better, but power nonetheless." Dooku wanted to deny it, but standing there, feeling the dark side presence of this Sith Lord, he couldn't lie to himself anymore. Sidious was right. Every frustration, every act of violence, every moment of satisfaction at defeating his enemies, all of it had been drawing on darkness, even if he hadn't acknowledged it. "You can walk away," Sidious said. "I won't stop you. But if you do, you'll accomplish nothing. The Republic will continue to rot, the Jedi will continue to fail, and all your potential, all your power, all your vision for a better galaxy will be wasted. Or you can join me. Embrace what you've already been using. Learn the full depths of the Force, both light and dark. Help me reshape the galaxy into something stronger, something better. The choice is yours." It was, Dooku would later understand, the moment his fate was sealed. Not because Sidious forced him, not because he had no choice, but because when faced with the option to walk away or to embrace unlimited power in service of his goals, he chose power. "What would you have me do?" Dooku asked. Sidious smiled. "First, we need to deal with a loose end." The Fall. Master Yaddle was a member of the Jedi High Council, a female of the same species as Yoda, long-lived and wise in the Force. She had been suspicious of Chancellor Palpatine for some time, sensing something off about him that she couldn't quite identify. Her investigations had led her to one of Coruscant's industrial sectors, a place called the Works. She had not gone there alone. She had told other Jedi where she was going, but she had not expected what she found. Count Dooku, her former colleague, meeting with someone whose dark side presence was overwhelming. "Dooku?" she said, emerging from the shadows. "What are you doing here?" Dooku turned to face her, and Yaddle saw immediately that something was wrong. His eyes held a darkness that hadn't been there before. His stance, his presence in the Force, everything about him screamed danger. "Master Yaddle," Dooku said, his voice carefully controlled, "this is unexpected." "You're involved with a Sith," Yaddle said, igniting her lightsaber. "Whatever he's promised you, whatever he's told you, it's lies. You can still turn back from this, Dooku. It's not too late." But it was too late. Dooku knew it even if Yaddle didn't. He had made his choice, and that choice required silencing anyone who could expose them before their plans were complete. "I'm sorry," Dooku said, and meant it. "You were always kind to me, but you don't understand what needs to be done." "Then help me understand," Yaddle pleaded. "We can go to the council together. We can—" She didn't finish the sentence. Dooku drew on the dark side more fully than he ever had before and attacked with a speed that shocked them both. Yaddle, caught off guard by the ferocity of the assault, barely managed to raise her lightsaber in defense. They dueled in the industrial complex, their blades casting strange shadows on the walls. Yaddle was powerful, experienced, a council member for a good reason, but Dooku had been training under Sidious's guidance, learning techniques the Jedi had forgotten or never known. He channeled his rage, his grief, his ambition, all of it flowing through him as fuel for his attacks. The duel was brief. Yaddle fought valiantly, but she had not been prepared for this confrontation. She had expected to reason with a fallen friend, not to face a Sith apprentice who had committed fully to the dark side. When Dooku's lightsaber finally pierced her chest, Yaddle looked at him with profound sadness. "Lost you are," she whispered. "Forever." She fell, her life force dimming and then extinguishing completely. Dooku stood over her body, lightsaber still ignited, breathing hard. He had just killed a Jedi Council member, someone he had worked alongside for years. There was no going back from this. No redemption. No reclaiming his place in the Order. He was no longer a Jedi in any sense that mattered. "Well done," Sidious said, emerging fully from the shadows. "Your first significant step into darkness. How do you feel?" Dooku wanted to say he felt nothing, but that would be a lie. He felt powerful. He felt terrible. He felt exhilarated and horrified in equal measure. "I feel like I've crossed a line," he admitted. "You have," Sidious agreed, "and on the other side of that line lies your true potential. From this moment forward, you are no longer Count Dooku, former Jedi. You are Darth Tyranus, Sith Lord, my apprentice, and together we will bring down the Republic and the Jedi both." Dooku, now Tyrannus, bowed to his new master. The transformation was complete. Qui-Gon Jinn's death had pushed him away from the Jedi. The Council's rejection had embittered him. Palpatine's seduction had tempted him. But this moment, standing over Yaddle's body, accepting the title of Darth Tyranus, this was when Dooku truly fell. Everything that followed was consequence. The architect of war. As Darth Tyrannus, Dooku became the face of the Separatist movement while hiding his Sith nature. Using his wealth, his noble title, and his reputation as a former Jedi, he recruited entire star systems to the cause of breaking away from the Republic. His message resonated with many who had grown tired of Senate corruption and corporate exploitation. But behind the public face of the idealistic reformer, Tyrannus was orchestrating something far more sinister. He was building not one army, but two. Years earlier, a Jedi master named Separatist, Dooku's old friend, had foreseen a great conflict approaching. Acting on his visions and without council authorization, Separatist had secretly commissioned the creation of a clone army on the planet Kamino. The cloners would create millions of soldiers, all bred from a single template, trained to fight and programmed to obey. It was an audacious move, one that would have been controversial if the Council had known. But Sifo-Dyas had kept it secret, believing the Order would reject his warning, just as they had rejected so many others. Dooku, now Tyrannus, learned of his old friend's project. He saw its potential immediately. These clones could be the Republic's army, an overwhelming force that could fight the Separatist battle droids. But they could also be something more, a sleeper agent embedded in the heart of the Jedi's military forces. The problem was Sifo-Dyas himself. His friend would never agree to pervert his vision of a defensive army into a weapon for the Sith, which meant Sifo-Dyas had to die. Tyranus hired the Pike Syndicate, a criminal organization, to ambush Sifo-Dyas' ship. The attack was swift and brutal. The Jedi Master's vessel was destroyed, and Sifo-Dyas was killed. To cover his tracks, Tyrannus kept Sifo-Dyas' aide, Silman, alive as a captive, insurance, in case anyone investigated too closely. With Sifo-Dyas gone, Tyrannus approached the Kaminoans as Master Tyrannus, claiming to be continuing the Jedi's work. He provided funding, specified additional programming for the clones, and most importantly, embedded a secret protocol into every clone's brain. Order 66. When activated, this protocol would compel the clones to execute their Jedi commanders without question or hesitation. The army that the Jedi would come to rely on, that would fight by their side for years, contained the seeds of their own destruction. But an army needed a template, a source for the genetic material that would be replicated millions of times. Tyrannus chose carefully. He needed someone skilled, resilient, and most importantly, someone who would be loyal to the Sith cause without knowing it. He selected Jango Fett, a renowned bounty hunter, offering him a fortune in exchange for his genetic material. Jango agreed, stipulating only that he receive one unaltered clone as his son. The child would be named Boba. As the clone army developed in secret on Kamino, Tyrannus turned his attention to building its opposition. Working with Newt Gunray and the Trade Federation, the Banking Clan, the Techno Union, and other corporate entities, he orchestrated the construction of massive droid armies. Battle droids, super battle droids, droidekas, each designed for specific combat roles. To lead these mechanical warriors, Tyrannus recruited General Grievous, a Kalish warrior who had been transformed into a cyborg after a severe injury. Tyrannus personally trained Grievous in lightsaber combat, teaching him to wield multiple sabers at once and to use his cybernetic advantages to overwhelm Jedi opponents. It was intricate work, building two armies to fight each other while serving the same ultimate master. But Tyrannus managed it with the same precision he had once applied to Jedi missions. Every piece was carefully positioned, every contingency planned for. He even deleted the planet Kamino from the Jedi archives, using his former access to temple systems. When the Jedi eventually stumbled onto the clone army's existence, it would seem like a mysterious gift rather than a Sith manipulation. Finally, the pieces were in place. The Separatist alliance was ready to make its move. The clone army was nearing completion. All that remained was to ignite the spark that would plunge the galaxy into war. That spark would be struck on Geonosis. The first battle. The Battle of Geonosis officially began the Clone Wars, though the actual conflict had been building for years through Tyrannus's machinations. When Obi-Wan Kenobi discovered the clone army and traced the Separatist leadership to Geonosis, when Anakin Skywalker and Padme Amidala rushed to his rescue, when the Jedi launched a strike force to save their captured comrades, everything Tyrannus and Sidious had planned came to fruition. The Jedi arrived in force, 200 of their finest warriors descending into a Geonosian arena where Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Padme were about to be executed. The Republic's new clone army, discovered just in time, came to support them under Master Yoda's command. It was chaos, beautiful, orchestrated chaos. Tyrannus watched from a safe vantage point as Jedi fought droids, as the first clones deployed into combat, as the pieces moved exactly as predicted. The war had begun. The Jedi were now generals, forced to abandon their role as peacekeepers to become warriors. The Republic was militarizing. Palpatine was gaining emergency powers. Everything was proceeding as designed, but there were complications. Obi-Wan Kenobi, that persistent fool, had tracked Tyrannus to Geonosis and confronted him with accusations. During their discussion before the battle, Tyrannus had actually told Kenobi the truth, that a Sith Lord named Darth Sidious controlled the Senate. He had hoped to recruit the Jedi, to turn him as he himself had been turned. Kenobi had refused, of course. The Jedi's faith in their order was still too strong, but Tyrannus didn't mind. The seed was planted. When the truth eventually emerged, some might remember that he had tried to warn them. After the battle began and the tide turned against the Separatists, Tyrannus decided it was time to withdraw. He made his way to his secret hangar preparing to escape, but Obi-Wan and Anakin Skywalker pursued him. The young Jedi burst into the hangar, lightsabers ignited. They wanted revenge for their capture, for the Jedi who had died in the arena, for the war that Tyrannus had helped orchestrate. "You're going to pay for all the Jedi you've killed today," Anakin declared. Tyrannus regarded the young Padawan with interest. This was the boy Qui-Gon had died protecting, the one Qui-Gon believed was the chosen one. There was power in him, raw and undisciplined, exactly the kind Sidious wanted to corrupt. "Brave of you, boy," Tyrannus said, igniting his red blade, "but foolish. I would have thought you'd learned your lesson about overconfidence." Anakin charged without waiting for Obi-Wan to coordinate. The impulsive attack was exactly what Tyrannus expected from the young man. He deflected the wild strikes easily, forcing Anakin back with casual precision. Then he unleashed Force lightning, channeling dark side energy through his fingertips. Anakin screamed as the electricity coursed through him, dropping to the ground, convulsing. Tyrannus smiled. This was power the Jedi would never teach, could never teach. Obi-Wan attacked next, more measured in his approach. He used Soresu, Form III, a defensive style focused on outlasting an opponent. Tyrannus recognized it immediately, Qui-Gon's apprentice, fighting the way Qui-Gon had taught him. They dueled across the hangar. Tyrannus employed Makashi, Form II, the precision and elegance of his style matching perfectly against Obi-Wan's defense. But Makashi was designed for lightsaber combat, for overwhelming an opponent through superior technique. And while Obi-Wan was skilled, he was not in Tyrannus's league. A quick feint, followed by a slash across Obi-Wan's arm and a stab to his thigh. The Jedi Knight went down, wounded but alive. Tyrannus could have killed him easily, but that wasn't the plan. Dead Jedi were useful martyrs. Defeated Jedi were humiliated reminders of Separatist superiority. Anakin, having recovered from the lightning, grabbed Obi-Wan's fallen lightsaber and attacked again, this time wielding two blades. It was a bold move, showing the kind of adaptive thinking that made the boy interesting. But dual wielding required training, practice, a level of coordination that Anakin simply didn't have yet. Tyrannus destroyed one of the lightsabers within seconds, then pressed his advantage. The boy was strong, but strength without technique was just wasted potential. A sweep of his blade, and Anakin's right arm was severed at the elbow. The limb fell to the ground, still holding the lightsaber. Anakin collapsed beside Obi-Wan, screaming in pain and shock. Tyrannus stood over them both, victorious. Two Jedi, defeated and helpless. He could end them now. It would be easy. But then he felt it. A familiar presence in the Force, one he hadn't encountered in decades. His former master had arrived. Yoda entered the hangar, ancient and small and radiating power that made the very air seem to compress. His expression was grief-stricken as he took in his fallen great-grandpadawan and the young Skywalker, both wounded and vulnerable. "Dooku," Yoda said quietly. "That name no longer has any meaning for me," Tyrannus replied. "The Jedi are my enemy now, Master Yoda, even you." "Then mourn you I shall," Yoda said, "for fallen so far you have." Tyrannus attacked with Force lightning, the dark side power he had learned from Sidious. But Yoda absorbed the energy easily, almost casually, using the Force to dissipate it harmlessly. The ancient Jedi Master had forgotten more about the Force than most Jedi would ever learn. "Still much to learn you have," Yoda observed. Frustrated, Tyrannus ignited his lightsaber and attacked. But fighting Yoda was unlike fighting any other opponent. The small Jedi moved with impossible speed and grace, his ancient lightsaber forms executed with perfect precision. He was everywhere and nowhere, his blade meeting Tyrannus's at every turn, blocking, parrying, countering. For the first time in the battle, Tyrannus felt something he hadn't experienced in years: doubt. He couldn't defeat Yoda, not here, not now. His former master was simply too skilled, too experienced, too powerful. If he continued this duel, he would lose, and losing meant death or capture, either of which would destroy years of careful planning. So Tyrannus made a tactical retreat. Using the Force, he wrenched a massive metal pillar from its moorings and sent it hurtling toward Anakin and Obi-Wan. Yoda immediately had to divert his attention to catching the pillar, using all his concentration to prevent it from crushing the wounded Jedi. In that moment of distraction, Tyrannus fled to his ship and launched. As he escaped Geonosis's atmosphere, he allowed himself a moment of bitter satisfaction. The Clone Wars had begun. The Jedi were now generals. The Republic was mobilizing for total war. Everything was proceeding according to plan, even if his former master had humiliated him in the process. The Clone Wars. The 3 years of the Clone Wars were, for Darth Tyranus, a carefully orchestrated performance. As Count Dooku, he was the public face of the Separatist movement, the idealistic former Jedi, who sought independence from a corrupt republic. As Darth Tyranus, he served his master's true agenda, prolonging the conflict, weakening both sides, setting the stage for the Sith's ultimate victory. He commanded vast droid armies, but ensured they never quite achieved total victory. He launched devastating attacks, but always left openings for Republic counteroffensives. He assassinated key Republic figures, but never the ones whose deaths would actually end the war quickly. It was a delicate balance, and Tyrannus walked it with precision. One of his key weapons in this shadow war was Asajj Ventress, the assassin. Tyrannus had discovered Ventress on the planet Ratatak, fighting as a gladiator in brutal arena combat. She was a Dathomirian Night Sister, trained in the Force by a Jedi named Narek, who had been stranded on Ratatak. When Narek was killed by pirates, Ventress had fallen to the dark side, her grief and rage transforming her into a deadly warrior. Tyrannus saw potential in her. She was powerful, skilled, and consumed by hatred for the Jedi who had abandoned her master. Perfect qualities for an assassin. He recruited her with promises of power and revenge. He trained her in Form II, giving her a curved-hilted lightsaber similar to his own. He taught her to channel the dark side, to use her pain as fuel over time. Ventress became one of his most effective weapons, leading Separatist forces, undertaking covert missions, and dueling Jedi across the galaxy. She was not his apprentice, not truly. The Sith rule of two forbade it, and Sidious would not tolerate any true rival to his own apprentice. But Tyrannus trained her nonetheless, seeing her as a useful tool and perhaps as something more. There was an element of genuine care in how he trained Ventress. She reminded him in some ways of what he had lost when he left the Jedi, a dedicated student to shape. Someone who looked to him for guidance. It was the closest thing to family he had allowed himself since leaving Serenno. But Sidious saw the relationship differently. Midway through the Clone Wars, after Ventress had proven particularly effective in several operations, Sidious contacted his apprentice. "Your assassin is growing too powerful," the Sith Master said. "I sense you training her as more than a simple tool." "This cannot continue." "Ventress is loyal," Tyrannus protested. "She serves our cause well." "For now," Sidious replied. "But you forget, my apprentice, that I too was once a Padawan who grew beyond his master. Ventress will do the same with you, and when she does, she will become a threat to our plans. You will eliminate her." "Master, that is my command," Sidious said, his voice brooking no argument. "Kill her, or I will consider you unfit to continue as my apprentice." It was the way of the Sith. Betrayal. The strong replacing the weak. Tyrannus had known this intellectually, but he had not expected to have to enact it personally. Ventress was useful. More than that, he had invested years in her training. But the alternative was losing everything. During a mission over Sullust, Tyrannus enacted Sidious's order. While Ventress was engaged in combat with Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi, Tyrannus ordered her supporting Separatist forces to withdraw. Then he personally destroyed her fighter, leaving her to die in the vacuum of space. But Ventress was resourceful. She survived the attack and realized immediately that her master had betrayed her. Wounded and furious, she returned to her homeworld of Dathomir and the Night Sisters, who were her people. Together with Mother Talzin, the leader of the Night Sisters, Ventress plotted revenge. They would give Tyrannus a new apprentice, one who would seem loyal, but would actually be working for the Night Sisters. This false apprentice would help them assassinate the Sith Lord who had betrayed Ventress's trust. The man they selected was a Zabrak warrior named Savage Opress. Using dark magics, they transformed him into a monster, powerful and savage but controllable through their spells. They presented him to Tyrannus as a potential apprentice, a replacement for the fallen Ventress. Tyrannus accepted him, seeing potential in Opress's raw power. He began training the Zabrak just as he had trained Ventress, teaching him to channel rage, to fight with abandon, to embrace the dark side completely. But the Night Sisters' magic eventually broke under the strain of Opress's growing power. The Zabrak turned on everyone, attacking Tyrannus, Ventress, and anyone else within reach before fleeing into the galaxy. Tyrannus survived the betrayal, but recognized that he had underestimated the Night Sisters. In retaliation, he sent General Grievous to Dathomir with orders to exterminate the entire clan. The cyborg general and his droid armies massacred the Night Sisters, leaving only a handful of survivors. It was brutal. It was efficient. It was exactly what the Sith would do. Ventress survived once more, escaping the slaughter and eventually becoming a bounty hunter. Her path would cross Tyrannus's several more times throughout the Clone Wars. Their relationship transformed from master and student to bitter enemies. Each encounter reminded Tyrannus of what he had become. He had cared for Ventress in his way, and he had betrayed her without hesitation because his master commanded it. That was the way of the Sith. That was the path he had chosen. There was no going back. The duels. Throughout the Clone Wars, Darth Tyranus clashed with numerous Jedi. Each duel was an opportunity to demonstrate Separatist superiority, while also testing his skills against the Order that had once been his home. His most frequent opponents were Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi. They fought him aboard ships, on planets, in a variety of contexts. Each time, Tyrannus held the advantage. His mastery of Makashi gave him an edge in lightsaber combat that few could match, and his decades of experience made him a far more complete warrior than the younger Jedi. In one particularly notable encounter in the Clone Wars animated series, Tyrannus dueled Anakin aboard the Separatist dreadnought, the Invisible Hand. It was one of many confrontations, but this one revealed something important about the young Jedi's growth. Anakin was getting stronger. His technique was refining. The raw power that had been unfocused during their first duel on Geonosis was now being channeled more effectively. He still fought with passion and aggression, using Form V's Gem-So variant to press attacks with overwhelming force. But there was calculation behind it now. Tyrannus recognized the danger. Sidious wanted Anakin as his next apprentice, wanted to corrupt the Chosen One and turn him into the ultimate Sith weapon. But that meant Tyrannus himself was being groomed for replacement. Every time he faced Skywalker, he was essentially training his own successor. The irony was not lost on him. Despite Anakin's improvement, Tyrannus continued to best him in their duels throughout the war. Experience and technique still trumped raw power, but the margin was closing, and both of them knew it. The final betrayal. The Clone Wars reached their culmination in the Battle of Coruscant. In a staged operation that was actually part of Sidious's grand plan, General Grievous's fleet attacked the Republic capital. The cyborg general abducted Chancellor Palpatine, taking him aboard the Separatist flagship, Invisible Hand. It was all theater, of course. Palpatine had orchestrated his own kidnapping, but to the Republic and the Jedi, it appeared to be the Separatist' most audacious move yet. Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi led the rescue mission, fighting their way aboard the Invisible Hand to rescue the Chancellor. They found him bound to a chair in the ship's observation deck, with Darth Tyranus standing guard. "This time, we'll do it together," Obi-Wan said to Anakin, remembering their previous defeats. Tyrannus smiled. "I've been looking forward to this," he said. The duel began with both Jedi attacking in coordination. Tyrannus recognized their strategy immediately. They had learned from their past encounters, developed tactics to counter his Makashi mastery. Obi-Wan's Soresu defense would protect them, while Anakin's Gem-So offense would probe for openings. It was a sound plan. Under other circumstances, it might even have worked. But Tyrannus was fighting with decades of experience and the full power of the dark side. He met their coordinated assault with contemptuous ease, his red blade dancing between their attacks. He separated them, using the Force to push Obi-Wan away while focusing on Anakin. The young Jedi pressed him hard, but Tyrannus remained in control. He drove Anakin up a flight of stairs, their blades clashing in a rhythm that had become familiar over years of conflict. When Obi-Wan rejoined the fight, attacking from behind, Tyrannus adapted instantly. He kicked Anakin aside and used the Force to crush Obi-Wan against a railing, dropping a heavy piece of debris on top of him for good measure. The Jedi Master was down, unconscious, or at least incapacitated. Now, it was just Tyrannus and Anakin, as it had been so many times before. But something was different this time. Anakin's eyes held a darkness Tyrannus had not seen before. The young Jedi was not just angry, he was channeling that anger, using it to fuel his attacks. He was tapping into the dark side, drawing on exactly the kind of power that Sidious wanted him to embrace. Tyrannus tried to break his concentration, using Dun Mosh, the Sith technique of psychological warfare, through taunts and intimidation. "I sense great fear in you, Skywalker," he said. "You have hate, you have anger, but you don't use them." It was the wrong thing to say. Anakin's fear wasn't about facing Tyrannus alone. It was fear for Obi-Wan. Fear that his master and friend might be dead or dying. That fear transformed instantly into rage, and that rage flowed directly into his fighting style. The young Jedi came at Tyrannus with unprecedented ferocity. Every attack was faster, stronger, more aggressive than anything he had shown before. Tyrannus found himself actually struggling to defend. His perfect technique not quite enough against this onslaught of raw dark side-fueled power. They crossed blades again and again, Anakin pressing forward relentlessly. Tyrannus fell back, not quite retreating, but definitely losing ground. His own dark side powers, honed over years, were being matched by a natural talent accessing darkness for the first time. In a flurry of strikes that came too fast to fully process, Anakin broke through Tyrannus' defense. The first strike severed one hand. The second took the other. Tyrannus' lightsaber clattered to the ground as he fell to his knees, defenseless. Anakin caught the fallen lightsaber with the Force and brought both blades to rest in an X shape across Tyrannus' neck. For the first time in years, Darth Tyranus felt true fear. From his chair, Palpatine spoke, not with his friendly chancellor voice, but with the commanding tone of Darth Sidious. "Good, Anakin, good. Kill him now." Tyrannus looked at his master in disbelief. This was always the plan, to have Skywalker kill him? All these years of service, all the careful manipulation and orchestration of the Clone Wars, and it had all been building to this moment where he would be cast aside like a broken tool? "Do it," Palpatine commanded. Anakin hesitated. "I shouldn't." "It's not the Jedi way." "He's too dangerous to be kept alive," Palpatine insisted, his eyes locked on Anakin's. "Do it." In that moment, Tyrannus understood everything. Sidious had never intended for him to rule by his side. He had always been a placeholder, a temporary apprentice meant to be replaced by the Chosen One. The Clone Wars, the Separatist movement, even the corruption of the Republic, all of it had been designed not to elevate Tyrannus, but to break down Anakin Skywalker's resistance to the dark side. He opened his mouth to speak, to warn Skywalker, to expose Palpatine as Darth Sidious, and perhaps salvage something from this betrayal. But before he could form the words, Anakin made his choice. The lightsabers moved, Tyrannus' head separated from his shoulders. In his final instant of consciousness, Darth Tyranus thought of Qui-Gon, of Separatist, of Ventress, of everyone he had betrayed on his path to power, and he understood with perfect clarity what Sidious had always known. Treachery is the way of the Sith. Then there was nothing. Epilogue, the legacy. Count Dooku died believing he had failed, but in truth, his role in Darth Sidious's plan was a complete success. The Clone Wars he helped orchestrate, destroy the Jedi Order, and transform the Republic into the Empire. The Clone Army he helped create executed Order 66, killing thousands of Jedi across the galaxy. The political structures he had undermined made it possible for Palpatine to seize absolute power. And his death served its purpose perfectly, pushing Anakin Skywalker one step further toward becoming Darth Vader. In the days following the Battle of Coruscant, very few mourned Dooku. To the Republic, he was a traitor who had brought war to the galaxy. To the Separatists, he was a leader who had failed to deliver victory. To the Jedi, he was a fallen master who had turned to darkness. Only a handful of beings understood what had truly happened, and they were Sith, who didn't care about the individual except as he served their ultimate goals. Obi-Wan Kenobi, when he learned of Dooku's death, felt a strange mix of relief and chagrin. This was the man who had trained Qui-Gon, who had once been respected throughout the Order. His fall and death marked the end of an era, the final severing of that ancient connection. But Obi-Wan was too busy fighting to survive Order 66 and the rise of the Empire to dwell on it long. Yoda, when he felt Dooku's death through the Force, meditated on it briefly. His former student, the one whose potential had been so vast, had finally reached his end. Yoda had seen it coming decades earlier, had sensed the seeds of pride and doubt that would eventually grow into betrayal. But even he had not imagined how far Dooku would fall, or how much damage he would cause in his falling. Asajj Ventress, when she eventually learned of her former master's death, felt no satisfaction. She had wanted to kill him herself, to make him pay for his betrayal. The fact that he had died as she had almost died, betrayed by a master who no longer had use for him, seemed fitting. But it brought her no peace. The galaxy moved on. The Jedi were all but extinct. The Republic became the Empire, and Count Dooku became a footnote in history, the Separatist leader whose rebellion had paved the way for tyranny. But his legacy lived on in ways he never intended. Anakin Skywalker, whose first defeat at Dooku's hands on Geonosis had cost him his arm and his confidence, spent the Clone Wars growing stronger through encounters with the Count. Each duel taught him something about using anger as fuel, about channeling dark emotions into power. By the time Anakin executed Dooku on the Invisible Hand, he had already walked far down the path to becoming Darth Vader. The curved-hilt lightsaber design that Dooku favored would inspire future dark side users. His mastery of Makashi, Form II, would be studied by anyone serious about dueling technique. His example of a Jedi master who left the Order and thrived outside it would plant seeds of doubt in future generations. And perhaps most importantly, his warnings to Obi-Wan on Geonosis about a Sith Lord controlling the Senate proved to be absolutely accurate. If the Jedi had listened, if they had investigated seriously, they might have discovered Palpatine's true identity before it was too late. But they didn't listen. Just as they hadn't listened to Dooku when he was still a Jedi, warning them about corruption and complacency. In the end, Count Dooku's greatest failure was also his most profound truth. He had been right about the Jedi Order's weaknesses, right about the Republic's corruption, right about the need for change. He had simply chosen the wrong path. To address those problems, instead of reforming from within, he had sought to destroy. Instead of building something better, he had helped erect something worse. Instead of using his power to protect the innocent, as he had once dreamed, he had become the very evil he thought he was fighting. The tragedy of Dooku was that he saw the problems clearly, but chose the wrong solutions. The warning of his story was that even the best intentions could lead to the darkest outcomes when pride, anger, and the promise of power clouded one's judgment. He was born into nobility, trained by the greatest Jedi master of his age, blessed with tremendous talent and potential. He could have been one of the Order's greatest lights, a reformer who brought necessary change while preserving what was good. Instead, he became Darth Tyranus, architect of a war that killed millions and destroyed the last remnants of Republic democracy. And in his final moments, Betrayed by the master he had served so faithfully, he understood at last what Yoda had tried to teach him all those years ago. Power without wisdom is dangerous, and wisdom without compassion is empty. Count Dooku had possessed power in abundance, but wisdom and compassion, those he had lost along his journey into darkness. And it cost him everything. His story ends on the floor of the invisible hand, a cautionary tale about the dangers of certainty, the seduction of power, and the price of betrayal. May we remember Count Dooku not as he became, but as he could have been. And may we learn from his fall, and there we have it. The complete history of Count Dooku, from his abandonment in the forests of Serenno to his execution at Anakin Skywalker's hands. A man who started with noble intentions, who genuinely wanted to make the galaxy better, but who chose a path that led only to destruction and death. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of Star Wars' most complex villains, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. We cover Sith lore, dark side history, and the stories of those who walk the path between light and darkness. There's so much more to explore in the galaxy far, far away, and I'd love to have you along for the journey. Let me know in the comments what you thought of Count Dooku's story. Do you think he could have been redeemed? Was his fall inevitable from the moment he was abandoned by his father? Could the Jedi have done anything differently to keep him in the Order? And if there are other Sith or dark side users you'd like me to cover in future videos, drop their names below. The dark side of the Force has many stories to tell, and we've only begun to scratch the surface. Until next time, may the Force be with you. Even in darkness, especially in darkness, we must remember that light exists, and sometimes that light is found in understanding how and why the darkness spreads. Thanks for watching. Now go get some rest. You've earned it.